L'chaim and Mazel Tov to the Willigs and the Fromowitzes. And Hamishbocha. There we go. That's to all of Klausel. This is in lieu of us showing up to the Shalom Zacha. We had Baruch Hashem another Shalom Zacha on this side of town. So it's, yeah, sure.
Actually, his son and daughter live in the same building.
Oh,
T-Nex, so
there you go.
I know Jake, and actually also
Look at that.
Yeah.
Baruch Hashem. So their bris was this morning. Baruch Hashem. So that was good. And the tefillah that we say at every bris, it's Kedai. Please God, we should keep the tefillah in mind, especially with everything going on in the world. Is that Eliyahu Navi comes to the bris? That's Eliyahu Navi shows up to the bris, and then we daven that Eliyahu Navi should not leave. He should stick around to be the Mavasa Hagula, because that's the tefillah. I mentioned this morning at the bris because it's shaykh to everything that we're talking about, and shaykh to all of these parashas. When Moshe Rabbeinu davens, Moshe Rabbeinu is fighting with Hashem. He says to him at the end of that conversation, he says, "Ribono shel olam, is not fair. I don't want to go. Shlach no biyad tishlach. Send with whoever you want to send." So Rashi there says it means Aaron, because Aaron is alive and well and living in Egypt, and he is already a leader of the Jewish people, right? Shlach no biyad tishlach. Send with Aaron. But the Targum son of Exile says no, it's not Aaron. Who's the person that Moshe Rabbeinu has in mind? Pinchas. Why Pinchas? Pinchas is Eliyahu. Pinchas zu Eliyahu.
I heard him this morning.
Right, there you go. So you remember, I'm checking. It's a chazar from this morning. But Pinchas zu Eliyahu, Pinchas is Eliyahu. And since Eliyahu is going to be Mavasa the Geula last Adava, so Moshe Rabbeinu says, Ribono shel olam, why do we need to deal with shtickle Geula now when we can have the Geula Shlema? Just tell Pinchas that he's got to, off he goes. He's got to be Mavasa the Geula. He'll announce that Geula is happening now, and then we won't have to deal with any Motzaras. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for his reasons, says, no, Moshe Rabbeinu, you're going to be the girl right now. But we spent a little bit of time last week understanding the seeming machlokes between Rashi and the Sfarim at the beginning of Parashat Shmos. Rashi telling us that the beginning is HaKadosh Baruch Hu loving the Jewish people and caring about the Jewish people and being concerned with the Jewish people. Why is it that we name the Jewish people the Bnei Yisrael at the beginning of the parasha? Because Hashem loves us. And why is it that there was this new king that doesn't know Yosef? And Rashi there says here, because he was like an Osef, good for nothing, low life, right? He was an anti-Semite. And then Bnei Yisrael paru v'yishus v'yirbu v'yatzim v'mayim v'temalei haaretz is something that the Jewish people had all of these babies. Rashi quotes Chazal and Medrash that the Jewish people are having 6 babies at a time. All of these things, Rashi tells us what's going on here. The Sforno comes along and twists the whole thing, flips it on its head. The Sforno told us, why are these 12 Shvatim being named? Because these people are worth knowing their names. People afterwards, even the best of them wasn't worth knowing them. Wasn't worth knowing who they were. The truth is, and it's worth being medayik in this, there are basically no names mentioned for the first 3 prakim of the Sefer. Meaning the book of names, Ele Shmos, Bnei Yisrael, is missing a lot of names. Like the Torah tells us, Vayelech Ishmi Beis Levi Vayikaches Bas Levi. There was this dude from the house of Levi, and he takes this daughter of Levi. What are their names? We don't know. And then his sister Achosai is standing Merachoik Ladea Mayasela. Who's the sister? And we know later it's Miriam, but no name, right? There's this daughter of Paro. What's her name? Doesn't say. Bas Paro, daughter of Paro. And there's Hayeled, the boy. What's his name? We don't know. The first name that we find out is the name that Bas Paro calls the baby that she finds, which is at the age of 3. She names him Moshe. Right? We don't know what his name was before that. Doesn't say. No names mentioned. And there's a lot to explain about that, and we'll get there. But Pashtus is that the Sforno is saying that these people are not worth knowing. The slave nation is not worth knowing. And the truth is, what Rashi and Sforno are explaining here are 2 sides of the coin that the Navi Yechezkel speaks about. And this is a famous nevuah, at least there's a piece of it that's a famous nevuah, which we quote at 2 popular occasions. One being a bris milah, and one being during the Haggadah Shel Pesach, at least according to most Haggadahs. And that is the pasuk, Ve'reich mispeseses b'damayich v'amalach b'damayich chayi v'amalach b'damayich chayi. What is the context of that pasuk? What are we talking about here?
You're talking about not only Dam Mila, you're talking about Dam Carbon Pesach, you're talking about smearing the blood on the doorposts. It's a lot of different things it stands for.
Good, but what's the pasuk talking about? Meaning, that's what we're using it for, talking about Dam Mila and Dam Pesach.
What parak is this?
This is in Yechezkel, in Parak 16. I'll give you a spoiler alert. It's not very nice. It's not very nice.
This is talking about the blood of like all the Jews that are sinning and stuff.
So let's learn the parak. Let's learn it inside. And it's worth to understand this parak because this parak is the opening to all of...
Look what I'm up to.
You're almost there.
I am up.
You're there.
I just
Just
wanted
listen.
this, but
Good.
I really didn't sink
Good.
in.
Good. So l'chaim.
I'm crazy.
Says the Navi as follows.
Put Trump's to not kill anything. I'm
There we
on
go.
the parak right now.
Here we go, Rabbi Trump. You're getting a shout out here. Says the pasuk as follows. Vayhi dvar Hashem elai lemar. So says Hashem. Ben Adam, son of man. Yechezkel is often called Ben Adam. He came out always called Ben Adam. He's the Navi that's called Ben Adam. Not for now, but Hayda es Yerushalayim es to'avaiseha. Inform Yerushalayim of its abominations. Meaning, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends the Navi Yechezkel to go yell at the Jewish people. The Jewish people who are termed Yerushalayim, meaning that's the epicenter of the Jewish people. Go and tell Yerushalayim what it's doing wrong. Ve'amarta, and so you shall say, Kayamar Hashem Elokim liYerushalayim. So says Hashem to Yerushalayim. Mecharesaych u'moladtaych me'eretz haKenani. Your birthplace and your origin is from the land of the Canaanites. Avich ha'emayri ve'imech chitis. Your father is an Amorite, your mother is a Hittite. Meaning you come from this land of Amorites, Hittites, and Canaanites. That is where you originated. And your birthright on the day that you were born. Loi karas sharich uvamayim loi ruchatzt limishi. On the day of your birth, nobody cut your umbilical cord, nobody washed you. Meaning you were born as an abandoned child. V'hamlich lo yihumlacht, and your skin was not salted to dry up and draw out the blood. V'achtel lo yichutalt, nobody swaddled you, nobody's cared about you. Lo yichasa alayich ayin, no eye looked upon you with pity. To do any of these necessities for you as a baby, as an infant. And you were tossed to the fields in your revulsion, in your disgusting state. On the day that you were born. This is a very, very descriptive nevuah, right? Klal Yisrael is being compared to an abandoned child. Like a child that was born and then thrown away, tossed. Here's our pasuk. Ve'evar alayich, and I came by you, ve'erech mispaseses b'damayich, and I saw you wallowing in your blood. V'amar lach b'damayich chayi, v'amar lach b'damayich chayi, and I said, b'damayich chayi, you should live like that. Stay there. You should live like that. Meaning, keep living like that, wallowing in your blood. Meaning, no interest. No interest. V'amar lach b'damayich chayi. Then the pasuk continues. And your hair grew wild. And this is the pasuk that we quote in the Haggadah, right? V'tirbi, and you grew, v'tigdali, you grew up, and your time came, meaning you started going through puberty, quite literally, meaning the Jewish people is an abandoned female child. Shadaim nechanu. you started growing breasts. And your hair grew. And you were naked and bare. Meaning, you're a wild animal child. Uncultured, uncared for, uncouth, no interest, nobody cares about you, nobody's interested in you. You're disgusting. You're abandoned. Ve'evar alayich, and I passed by verich, and now I see vehine itech eis dodim. And now is the time of dodim, of love. Meaning, this would be the time that a normal girl raised in a normal way would start being matched up with suitors. You're old enough that you should be getting married. Ve'afrois knafi alayich, and I spread my knaf, my cloak, over you. Ve'achaseh ervaseich, and I covered your nakedness. Ve'eshbalach, and I swore to you. Ve'avai bevris oisach, and I came into a covenant with you. Ne'um Hashem Elokim v'tehi li. So says Hashem, and you became mine. Meaning, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, I saw you, and I realized that no one will take care of you. That either I'm going to take responsibility for you, or nobody will. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm playing the role of the benevolent benefactor, passerby, that sees this wild animal young girl, street urchin, street rat, no one cares about her. And I spread my knaf, my blanket, my wings, I took you under my wing, quite literally. And I swore to take care of you. And I washed you in water. And I washed the blood off of you. And I anointed you with oil, meaning I took care of you. All of the things that nobody did for you once upon a time, I did for you. And I gave you jewelry, and I gave you shoes. And I gave you coverings of fine linen, and I covered you with silk. And you were growing up, and I put rings on your fingers, and a necklace around your neck. And I put rings in your nose, and jewelry in your ears, and a crown on your head. Meaning, I took care of you. I did all of the things for you that a father would do for his daughter when it was time for her to get married, or that a groom would do for a bride at the time of her marriage. I gave you fine fabrics and fine foods and fine perfumes, and you became incredibly successful, and you became worthy of royalty. Meaning you became a worthy princess bride. And your name went out amongst the nations about your great beauty. Because it was so beautiful, so total. Behadori asher samti alayich, with the beauty that I have placed upon you. Ne'um Hashem Elokim, so says Hashem. Vativtechi biyofyech. And now the story turns. Vativtechi biyofyech. You became bold. You became certain in your beauty. Vatizni al shemech. This is the Navi gets very, I don't want to say, but a shtickle R-rated. Vatizni al shemech, v'tishbechi es zenosayich al kol over lo yehi. You became confident in your beauty, and you used your name, Tizni al shemech, to engage in harlotry. And you poured out your desire for harlotry on any passerby. Vatikhi mi begadayich v'tasilach b'matos telaos, to us, and you took those fine clothes that I gave you, and you used them as bed linens, vatizni alehem, and you used them to sleep with other men. Lo bos v'lo yeh, anybody coming by. Tikchi klei tifarteich, and you took those beautiful vestments of jewelry, mizahavi u'mikaspi asher nasati lach, from my gold and my silver that I gave you, tasi lach tzalmei zachar vatizni bam, and you use them quite literally as bedroom toys to entice men. Vatichi is bigdi rikmateich metachasim v'shamni v'katarti lifnehem, and you took all of the beauty and perfume and you used them to seduce people licentiously. And the Navi continues. What's the story the Navi is telling? This is now in the days of Yechezkel. We are talking about 40 years after Yetzias Mitzrayim. We enter into Eretz Yisrael. Another 370-ish years until the building of the Beis Hamikdash. Another 300 years until these days of Yechezkel, giving Musa to the Jewish people. 700 years after Yetzias Mitzrayim. Or more. And the Navi is coming to the Jewish people and saying, let's set the record straight. Who are you and where are you from? Your origin story, the Navi says to Klal Yisrael, was as an abandoned, wayward, lost, uncultured nothing. The Rebbeinu Shalom comes by, loves you, cares for you, adopts you, is benevolent towards you, raises you from being a nothing. Not only that, but at the point in time that you had grown up, meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu invests in you, at the point in time that you had grown up, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this benevolent benefactor, young man passing by, not only loves you, cares for you, adopts you in terms of your well-being, but marries you and gives you everything under the sun. And you, Jewish people, have taken everything that you were given and cheated on God. That's called Avodah Zarah. Meaning the relationship between Hashem and the Jewish people is set up here in multiple levels. There is a relationship between Hashem and the Jewish people. Hashem is the benefactor and the Jewish people are the recipient completely. An undeserving, unworthy recipient. To the point in time where the relationship changes from unworthy to investment to a parent-child relationship, and then graduates to a husband-wife relationship. These three relationships we refer to often. There is the relationship of that's totally off balance, which is melech to eved, the relationship of parent-child, and the relationship of husband and wife. We refer to these three relationships all the time, most famously in the Piyut Yedid Nefesh. Yes? You ever thought about the first line of the Piyut Yedid Nefesh? Yedid Nefesh begins, Yedid Nefesh, what does it literally mean? Soulmate, beloved of my soul, right? That's the intimate romantic relationship. Yedid Nefesh. Av HaRachaman, merciful father, meaning that's the father-son relationship. Meshach avdecha el retzanecha, draw your eved, your slave, to your will. So the first line of Yedid Nefesh, you have those three relationships. And that's what the Navi is describing here. That there is these three relationships, and to a certain extent, while we never lose the Eved to Melech relationship, we never lose the parent-child relationship, the Av and Ben relationship, the point is to get to a intimate relationship of kivyachol, so to speak, equals. Right? That means the goal is for the Jewish people to feel a sense of belovedness with God. But it's at that point of belovedness, of closeness, that we're on top of the world. Everything's amazing. that we are most vulnerable to Vativtechibi of Yech, to saying, look at me, look at how amazing I am. The whole world is looking at the Jewish people and going, you're the envy of all of the nations, so I can do whatever I want. But that's later in the story. What the Navi here is describing is the process of being in Mitzrayim, of Yitzis Mitzrayim and Matan Torah. That's the three pieces of the story. Right? There's a piece of the story which is the Jewish people in Golos, in Egypt, what Chazal referred to as Mem Shari Tumah. 49 levels of Tumah, meaning totally decrepit, broken, disgusting. Begal nafshech. This is a far cry from Rashi saying, Hashem is loving the Jewish people, or so on. Hashem in the story is loving and benevolent and caring. Hashem is looking after the Jewish people. But what of the Jewish people themselves? That's what the Sforno is describing. Wallowing in our blood, in our revulsion, in our disgustingness. This is the story of the Jewish people over there, Avodah Zarah, in the land of Egypt. That's the story that the Navi is telling here. So you have two sides of the coin. Rashi, in his Perush, is explaining the perspective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of looking at the Jewish people, loving, caring, benevolent benefactor. And the Sforno is telling the story of, okay, but who are the Jewish people here? Nebuch, nothing, low life, disgusting. That's the story. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu deeply, desperately is trying to raise us up. So, Rabbi Yudi, you mentioned that the pasuk, right? What's that pasuk referring to? Chazal tell us that's referring to the blood of Milah and the blood of Pesach. How does that fit into the story here, right? So this is shayla, meaning you have to figure out Chazal being derish that. How does this fit into the story? So the story is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kiviyachol passes by and sees this baby, this infant Jewish people, this nascent, revolting Jewish people. And the Rebbeinu Shalom says, "V'amarlach b'damai chayi," and I said you should live in your blood, which is twofold. One part of that is "V'amarlach b'damai chayi," and I said you should live in your blood, meaning stay like that. But there's a part of that which is you should stay alive. Right? Meaning you're not going to be killed. You're not going to die. This won't be the end of you. Meaning that which the Navi is describing, and I said, you should stay like that. Meaning I'm not caring about it, I'm not doing anything. Is also the Rebbeinu Shalom saying, that through your blood you will live, meaning that you're going to stay alive here. So how are you going to stay alive? Because there's going to be blood, dam hamila and dam pesach. Meaning if you're willing to do something, then you get taken out of Mitzrayim. Meaning then ve'afras knafi alayich. There has to be some buy-in here. And that's why when the Jewish people gets a little bit older, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes, the first knafi alayich, and I put my wing over you, and I adopted you. Rabbi Stav would give a mashal to this. Mashal David. When Moshe Rabbeinu comes to the Jewish people, it says to them, it's this amazing scene in the middle of last week's parasha. Moshe Rabbeinu comes to them and says, this is it, at the end of Perek Daled. Vayelech Moshe v'Aaron. Moshe and Aaron go, v'yasvu es kol ziknei b'nei Yisrael. They gathered all of the elders of the Jewish people. Vayidaber Aaron es kol advarim asher diber Hashem Moshe. And Aaron said all of the things that Hashem said to Moshe. V'yasa esos le'nei ha'am, and he did all of the signs and wonders. V'ya'amein ha'am, and the people believed. Moshe don't understand that. They go, do you believe? They go, we believe, right? Do you believe? We believe. Vayishmu, and they heard, Ki pakod Hashem es b'nei Yisrael. That Hashem had remembered the Jewish people. V'chi ra'ah es hanyam. And then he remembered their pain. Vayikdu vayishtachavu. They prostrated themselves and they bowed down. Amazing. Amazing thing. Vayikdu vayishtachavu. Prostrated themselves, they bowed down. Wonderful. There's a problem though. Beginning of this week's parasha, beginning of Parashas Vayera, Moshe Rabbeinu comes to the Jewish people and he tells them the Arba Lashonos of Geula. Hashem promises the Jewish people, L'chein emar livnei Yisrael. So you should say to the Jewish people, Ani Hashem, I am God. V'etzesi eschem mitachas sivles Mitzrayim. I will take you out of the suffering of Egypt. That's v'etzesi. V'itzalti eschem me'avodasam. And I will save you from their work. V'ga'alti eschem, and I will redeem you b'zra netuya, with an outstretched arm of v'shvatim gedolim, with great wonders. V'lakachti eschem li la'am. I will take you to me as my people. V'yisi lachem la'elakim, and I will be to you a God. V'datem ki ani Hashem Elokechem. You will know that I am Hashem your God. Hamotzi eschem mitachas sivles Mitzrayim, that takes you out of the suffering of Egypt. Ve'evesi eschem el haaretz, and I will bring you to the land asher nasati es yadi la'seis esal Abraham Yisrael Yaakov, that I promised to give to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Nasati esal lachem rasha ani Hashem. I'll give it to you, the Jewish people, as an inheritance. I am God. What's the response of the people to this? No? What do they say? The 4 Lashonos of Geula, the whole of Yetzias Mitzrayim is about to happen. What do the Jewish people say? No?
What do they say? It's not possible or something? Or?
What do they say? Nothing. Vaydaber Moshe kein el bnei Yisrael. Moshe says all of these things to the Jewish people. V'lo shomu el Moshe mikotzer ruach me'avodah kasha. They didn't listen. They couldn't hear it. Mikotzer ruach, from shortness of breath, and me'avodah kasha, from hard labor. What does that mean?
Their spirits were beaten down. Well, it's a slave mentality.
The end of last week's parasha, they all vayamin ha'am. They believe. Do you believe? We believe. What happened? So something did happen in between. What happened in between is Moshe goes to Paro and he says, let my people go. And what does he say? Double the work. Double the work. Somebody, one of my chaverim posted this online last week, that Paro was an environmentalist. He banned them from having straws, right? That's no more straws. So he said, yeah, you have to go find your own straws. This is like Paro works for Starbucks. No more straw. You have to. So the Meshech Chochmah asks this question. He goes, okay, fine. So maybe the correct response of the Jewish people is that they don't believe Moshe anymore. That's not what the pasuk says. The pasuk doesn't say that they didn't believe him. What does it say? They didn't listen to him. They didn't listen. They couldn't hear him. There's a Meshech Chochmah. We should see this inside. So whether this Meshech Chochmah, it is a fundamental Meshech Chochmah. This Meshech Chochmah will help you understand the whole of the trajectory of the Jewish people coming out of Mitzrayim. The whole story. The Meshech Chochmah says as follows. V'lo shamu el Moshe mikotzer ruach me'avodah kasha. Perush. What does that mean? Moshe Rabbeinu had told them in last week's parasha, Hashem remembered you. Right? That Hashem has remembered you. That he's going to save you from what? What's he going to save you from?
Suffering.
So, specifically, he's going to save you, and you'll tell me the difference, yeah? Let's get the exact words. Hashem is going to save you. Ki pakad Hashem es b'nei Yisrael, that Hashem remembered the Jewish people. V'chi ra'ah es hanyam, and that he saw their suffering. Vayikdu v'yishtachavu. They bowed down. That's what they believed, that Hashem had remembered them. That's it. Now Hashem is telling them, says Moshe Rabbeinu, V'yotzesi, I'm going to take you. V'yitzalti, I'm going to save you. I'm going to take you out of Egypt. I'm going to save you from the backbreaking labor. V'lakachti, I'm going to take you as my people. Right? V'galti, I'm going to redeem you. I'm going to take you as my people. You will know that I'm your God. Ve'evesi eschem al haaretz, and I'm going to take you to the land of Israel. This is a very different story. Radically different story. Says the Meshech Chochmah. What didn't they believe? Or what couldn't they hear? Perush inyan hava l'Eretz Yisrael. They couldn't hear that they were going to the land of Israel. Mikotzer ruach me'avad hakosha, from shortness of breath, me'avad hakosha, from hard backbreaking labor. Why? This is beauty. This is the slave mentality, as the Meshech Chochmah points out here. What is that slave mentality? She says, Ki derech kashei yom asher yachpotzu lishmaya rak kadei latzeis mitzarasam. All that they could hear was that the pain would end. V'loi lishmaya b'haftachos atidos v'hatzlachos niflaos. Not to hear future promises and grand, wondrous salvation and success. V'lachen, and therefore, Vayidaber Hashem. Therefore, when the pasuk says Hashem spoke v'yitzavim b'nei Yisrael, to command the Jewish people, ve'el para, and to para la'otzias b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim, to take the Jewish people out of Egypt. K'lamar rak l'daber rak odos zeh. Just talk about this: we're leaving Egypt. Chomosh nizkar l'kamar, we're going to say later. V'havein al derech tzchus, and you need to understand this clearly. That pashtus is, when Moshe Rabbeinu goes to the Jewish people the first time and he says, Hashem has remembered you. Hashem has remembered you. They go, whoa, that's great. This is the mashal that Rastav would give. If you would go to a Sudanese refugee right now, to a little boy who has spent his life running from like this warring faction to that warring faction, he hasn't had a warm meal since the last time he could remember. He hasn't had enough food to last him for more than a day at any point in his life. He's been raised to watch his back, to be fearful for his life. Now he's 15, 16 years old. And somebody on a multi-million-dollar private jet lands in the outskirts of his village and walks up to him wearing a three-piece suit and says to him, young man, what would you say to a free ride? Rastav used to say this to Harvard. That was before Harvard became what Harvard is now, right? A free ride, Ivy League college, room and board covered for a 15-year trajectory, finishing with a PhD in divinity and theology. Interested?
Is there food there?
That's what the kid's going to say,
Well,
right?
It's like talking to a Holocaust survivor. You live for the moment. It's one day at a time, because tomorrow you don't know if you'll be alive. You're going to worry about what's going to happen in 5 years.
The difference between the Holocaust survivor is that the Holocaust survivor might have remembered like a life before that, right?
Yeah.
No, he might have known what food was,
Right. Also, it has to be done piecemeal.
right?
And then it's interesting, we're talking about with Holocaust survivors or the same physical and mental piecemeal. So
Mhm.
eating has to be done.
Correct.
Mentally,
So does
slowly to get
Does
out
this
of
will
that.
tie into the fact that it's technically known as the four Lashonos of Geula, and of course the Arba Kosos. And the
Yes,
fifth one
these
is
are all related, meaning there's a trajectory here.
Because the four Lashonos of Geula, as a slave, you can comprehend but that fifth one is like it's in a different universe.
So the fifth one is even harder to understand, but even by Ga'alti eschem and lakachti eschem li la'am, I will take you to me as my people, vidatem ki ani Hashem, and you will know that I am your God. What? Meaning, for a slave, freedom is simply being on the other side of the whip. That's what freedom is. Meaning, the most that you have to look up to is to not be you, but to be that guy. That's what freedom is. Now, this Meshech Chachma, by the way, answers a kasha that you should ask and you should all be bothered by throughout the entirety of the rest of the Torah. Imagine for a moment that you have Rahman a Holocaust survivor that spent years in labor camp, in concentration camp, spent years in Auschwitz. Auschwitz is liberated, and he ends up in a DP camp. DP camps were not a picnic either. People were very sick. There was still violence, there was still robbery, there was still psychological trauma, she'ein kama, meaning there was very little food, there was very little medical care. People were still dying. And there were questions of where to go and what to do and how to get through this. But imagine somebody 2 years after being in the DP camp, and he's sitting down eating like whatever morsels of food are provided to them by whatever the Allied forces are able to scrounge up for them, sitting across the table, and he goes, "This food is terrible." And his chavrusa looks at him and he goes, "Yeah, this food is terrible." And he goes, "If only we were back in Auschwitz." Could you imagine such a thing? Imagine like two Jews in a DP camp saying, "If only we were back in Auschwitz." Yes?
Well, that's what they kept complaining about.
Untenable, right? How do you have Jews complaining, "Let's go back to Egypt"?
Again, the mentality was at least we had food.
I'm saying, but even so.
But it always came up when, where's the water or where's the, so it was always, oh, we don't have any food. At least we had food there. So it's really the most basic instincts, really base instincts, as opposed to any type of intellectual thought saying, hey, I think we're free. They didn't.
So my question is this.
Maybe
they were free to die.
Maybe they didn't think.
It took us out just to die.
Maybe their
That was their
freedom,
complaint.
maybe they didn't think that freedom was be long lasting. It's like, okay, we're going out and then we're going back. Who knows? They'll catch us, they'll bring us back. If not them, it'll be someone else.
Maybe, but I'm saying, but would anybody reasonably say, "Let's go back to Egypt"?
It's better than dying in the desert. That's the complaint was. You took us out of Egypt just to die in the desert.
Yeah, but
yes.
why? But why?
Here's my question.
It's not a rational.
They'd rather be alive and enslaved
I'm gonna-
than dead in the desert.
I'm gonna ask a tough question. When they say to Moshe, "Let's go back," Nitna Rosh v'nashuv Mitzrayim, let's pack and go back to Egypt, is that like a cynical, sarcastic way of saying, "Just give us food," or did they actually mean to go back to Egypt? Meaning, sometimes people will say things that are overblown, right?
Hyperbole.
Meaning, it would be better for us to go back to Egypt. Meaning, was it sarcastic? Like, how do you lane that? Do you lane that with sarcasm, with cynicism, with irony, or do you lane that for real?
I would say it's for real because it was everyone. It wasn't just a few individuals that were complaining like that. That's
Well,
how they all felt.
So it's interesting. Rashi points out over and over and over again that it was not everyone. It was the Erev Rav and oh no, it was a large percentage. It was at least a significant percentage that came out that was Erev Rav, or at least a sizable minority. But it certainly was not everybody. No, this is after they got the Torah.
This is a chukat before the snakes.
So 10
Yep.
times in the desert, the
Yeah,
Jewish
yeah,
people
it's
complain
wild.
about these
It's
things.
definitely that one.
So I want to point out something interesting. That of all of the times that the Jewish people complain in the Midbar, let's go back to Egypt. There is only one time that they say, let's go back and be slaves in Egypt. Only once.
Was that when they couldn't cross the Yam Suf?
Just before Yam Suf, they say, Ki tov lanu avod es Mitzrayim mimuten b'midbar. It would be better for us to be slaves in Egypt than to die in the desert. Why do they say Ki tov lanu avod es Mitzrayim there, but nowhere else? There is no other time. They said, let's go back to Egypt, but never let's go back and be slaves in Egypt. What changed?
They surpassed that sea there.
They witnessed a miracle.
Before it, they all they saw was death in front of them. So it was better at the moment to go back.
No, but the whole Torah says that. Well, the 8-9 times afterwards that they still come.
They still complain, but they never said, let's go be slaves. They said, let's go back to Egypt.
They saw Hashem destroy the Egyptians.
And therefore,
He's more powerful than
no, and therefore?
they're slaves to him now.
no. And therefore,
Uh,
there's nobody to be a slave
there's
to.
no- yeah, they're dead.
Egypt's over,
They can't be slaves. now.
right? Meaning, the pasuk says at the end of Kriyas Yam Suf, "Vayar Yisrael es Mitzrayim meis," not Mitzrim, Mitzrayim. They saw not the Egyptians dead; they saw Egypt was dead. It was over. Meaning, there was no longer a threat of avodas Mitzrayim. There's never a concern anymore. After the nobody's denying that they saw 10 plagues. Nobody's saying that they witnessed firsthand the death of Egypt. Meaning, the entirety of the Egyptian hierarchy is broken, is shattered. The riders, the horses, the chariots are finished. The whole thing is done. It's over. The whole thing is finished. And now they're saying, okay, no. Before Kriyas Yam Suf, we would rather be slaves than dead. True. But every time afterwards that they're complaining about the food and about the water and about the length of the journey and about the whole thing, what are they complaining about? What are they telling over and over and over again? Let's go back to Egypt. Why should we go back to Egypt?
That security there.
No, even better than that.
They said because there's nobody to rule over them anymore.
There's nobody there. So what's left in Egypt?
Wealthy.
And they watch them get
The Nile
Yeah.
that overflows every year. Seeds that you throw on the ground and they sprout forth. The bread basket of the ancient world. Why are we wallowing in a desert where Egypt is ripe for the pickings? Go back to Mitzrayim. Who's left there? Bunch of women and children and some other slaves? We're a nation. 600,000 men will go take the country for ourselves.
Was Paro killed?
So Chazal said that maybe Paro didn't die. But either which way, the entirety of the hierarchy of Egypt is broken. The soothsayers are all gone. The firstborns are all dead. The army is decimated, it's destroyed. There's nothing left. So what's left? Exactly what Egypt started with all those generations before. A fertile land and a beautiful Nile River. Let's take it. Why do we have to go to a desert? And so Moshe Rabbeinu points out over and over and over again in Sefer Dvarim, Eretz Yisrael is not like Eretz Mitzrayim. Eretz Mitzrayim, the land overflows. Eretz Yisrael, you have to have a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in order for the rain to come down. Meaning Egypt is the land where you get wealthy without having to think about God. Naturally, it's all there. It's an economy ready for the taking. So when the Jewish people say over and over and over again, I'd like to go back to Egypt, what they mean is we'd like to go back to a place where there's safety and security and plenty of food and plenty of water and nobody to bother us. We can we'll be more benevolent and we'll be nicer. We won't be, taskmasters and slave owners like our Egyptian overlords. We'll be nicer than them. We'll be more moral. But why can't we just become what they were? Why do we have to traipse through a desert? Why do we have to live in a land that has no natural water supply? Meaning, why can't we just be good goyim? Right? We just want to be good goyim. Why do we have to be this chosen people? That's the tiny throughout the 40 years in the desert. And that's the point that the Meshech Chochmah is making here. As when Moshe Rabbeinu says to them, "V'lakachti eschem li la'am ve'ayisi lachem le'elokim v'yidatem ki ani Hashem ve'hevesi eschem al ha'aretz." They're looking at them, they're going, can we just not be slaves here? Meaning, can we just be Egyptians? We don't want chosenness. We just want freedom. We don't want to be anything else. We just want to be free. Can we just be Egyptians?
Because they were really severed from any connection to Eretz Yisrael because
Completely.
the whole generation died out.
Correct.
So the previous generation, Shvatim, they knew what Eretz Yisrael was because they had lived there.
They knew what Eretz Yisrael was. They knew what monotheism
They
was.
left there because they didn't have security.
Right.
But this was a generation that had no Hasidah,
Nothing.
so that's why they could not connect with them, basically.
They couldn't connect with any piece of
also
it.
accepted the Torah,
Eventually,
and then they went through the desert.
yes.
So they still complained even after they accepted.
So what does that mean? This is, you took that Sudanese boy
Yeah.
and you brought him to your Ivy League college and you gave him room and board and you gave him like a shot in the arm where he could understand lectures in theology. Like, and then the shot wore off. And you said, now kid, work for it.
It's human nature, unfortunately.
Correct.
That's
None of this
our
is,
struggle,
none of this
how do you overcome
is
that?
antithetical to the nature of people. Meaning this is the story. And the Rambam describes this, by the way, the Rambam describes it, the beginning of Hilchos Avodas Kechavim, exactly your point, that the beginning of, the Rambam asks the question, the beginning of Hilchos Avodas Kechavim, he wants to know how come Avodah Zarah ever existed? Doesn't make any sense, right? Adam and Chava believed in God; they were monotheists.
Well,
Yes.
It was established because they were looking for a way of getting closer to God. So, first.
So he describes that. We're not going to go through the whole thing, but from the generation of Enosh they started worshiping Avodah Zarah. I mean, they wanted to serve God in other ways, and that turned into different symbols and idols and statues, and little by little people started moving away from Avodah Hashem until the Mabul came and that was all decrepit and disgusting, etc. And then Migdal Bavel, etc. Once again, until Avram Avinu. Until Avram Avinu says the Ram at the end of Halacha Beis says Aval Tzura Elamim lo yihaya sham mikira v'lo yoda ela yechidim ba'elam. But the rock of the world, nobody knew him, nobody recognized him except for a unique few. Kagon Chanach, like Chanach and Mesushalach, v'Noach v'Shem v'Eva. I mean, there's a handful of people, a smattering of people that still knew who God was. Al derech zeh haya ha'olam misgalgel v'hoilech, and this way the world was continuing and rolling away, and this trajectory would continue ad shenoilad amudai shel ha'olam, until the pillar of the world was born. Shehu Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu. He was the pillar of the world. Says the Rambam Halacha Gimel Kevan Nigmal Eitan Zeh. After this Eitan, this strong one, was Nigmal, was weaned. His chil shoytet b'da'atay v'hu katan v'lachashev b'yoyim u'v'alayla. He began to think. He began to go on these mental excursions, thought experiments. He was still a child, and he considered both night and day. He would think, how could it be that this world, that these revolutions, he's talking about planet Earth and the stars and the cycles, that all of these things are moving, and does not have a mover? Meaning, how do you have an effect without a cause? There needs to be a primary mover if things are moving. Inertia will keep something moving, but something must have made it move. Nothing moves without a mover. Who's spinning it? Right? That's the kasha that Avraham Avinu asks. If the world is spinning, then something is spinning it. Who is the one that spun the first dreidel? That's the kasha that by the way, there's no atheist that has an answer to this question. Right? What's making the world move? Right? So that's okay. People will answer Mother Nature, the laws of physics. The answer to that is, okay, so you have a different name for God. That's nice.
The universe.
Right? And?
That's what they call
Good. So we call that
it.
Tzurelam, the rock of the universe. That's good. Right? Melech Olam, the king of the universe. They're not wrong. It is the universe, but it's the thing that made the universe. I mean, there must be a mover if something moves. That's the reality. Avraham starts thinking like this. There must be something. He says, it can't spin itself. And the Rambam says that Avraham Avinu did not have a malamed. He didn't have a teacher. Nobody taught, nobody educated him. Nobody informed him. Ella mushka ba'ur kazdim bein ovdei avodah zarah hatifshim. He was stuck in this place called Ur Kazdim amongst these idiotic idol worshippers. He's with them. He's with the Chevra. He says, "Ve'aviv ve'imo v'chol ha'am ovdim avodah zarah," and everybody's oved avodah zarah. Ve'hu haya oved imahen, and he worshipped with them. Avraham Avinu is a Bal Tshuva. He grows up being an Oved Avodah Zarah.
What was going on with Shem and Aver at that time?
They were reclusive.
How come he didn't have a connection to them, and then later supposedly Yaakov has a connection to them?
So he does have a connection to them eventually. Certainly, according to Chazal, who tell us that Melchizedek is Shem, right? But at this point in time, he's in far-flung boondocks.
But how
I'm
come
saying.
Avraham Avinu, with all the people that he had, none of them followed his footsteps? I know that you said Eliezer, but besides Eliezer, no one followed. I mean, he was supposed to be the leader of the time, and he was supposed to be the greatest philosopher of the time.
Yeah,
So they took it, but nobody took the ball with them.
Correct.
Down the road.
Correct.
Nobody hear about him anymore.
Nobody took the ball.
no one.
No.
Yes.
And even Yitzchak, who's the second generation, no one took the ball from him. Oh, Yaakov took it, but he was on his own, basically.
Yeah, it's a good question. Avraham Avinu has the same kasha. Chazal asked the question, what happened to all the nefesh asher asu b'chara?
Right.
Meaning, what happened to all of that chevra? The Kotzke has a tongue-in-cheek, but it's probably pshat. He says, Avraham Avinu, midas hachesed. He was the open tent, and everybody came in, and the whole world. He says, Yitzchak Avinu was midas hagvura. He was terrifying. So they stopped coming to the shmuzim. They stopped coming to the tishes. I mean, and it faded. That's one mahalach. There's another mahalach. The Chasam Sofer has an interesting mahalach, which is that, and sometimes this is good musar for Rabbanim. You notice that Avraham Avinu is the biggest Baal Chesed in the world, but and he engages with and interacts with everybody until Yitzchak is born. And then it seems to be that he shuts down the Kiruv workshop. Because now I have to make sure that my son is educated and that he's not influenced by other things. Which is why Yishmael has to go. Sarah sees Yishmael doing whatever Yishmael is doing, out. Avraham Avinu realizes that his mission is not limited, it cannot be completed in one generation. Which means that the single most important thing to do is to ensure a continuation of this thing called monotheism, and the only way that he can ensure that this continues is by creating another generation.
Now you can take your thought, continuing that direction.
Yes.
And maybe that's what the Bnei Yisrael said, that we don't know, we don't want to go that continuation of following Moshe. We'd rather go back to Mitzrayim. At least we know what we got.
So you're right, but it wasn't even with that much thought. because the Rambam explains that after Avram comes Yitzchak, after Yitzchak comes Yaakov, and that Yaakov ensured that Talmud Torah was always happening. He says, "V'Yaakov Avinu Lamar is born of Kulam." Yaakov told of his children, "V'hivdil Levi," and then he set aside Levi. U'minehu Rosh, made him in charge. V'yeshiva b'yeshiva lelamed derech Hashem. Made him the Rosh Yeshiva to teach the ways of Hashem. Levi was set aside for this. Lishmar mitzvahs Avram, to keep up with the mitzvahs of Avram. Meaning, Levi was told, you are going to be in charge of the yeshivas. Says v'tziva es banav sheloi yafsiku mibnei Levi memuna echad memuna achar memuna kedei shelo yishkach halimud. And Yaakov Avinu ensures, says Levi, you're in charge of making sure that there are Rosh Yeshiva that come after you, that people are going to teach Torah and learn Torah after you. He says, "V'haya davar hoylech u'mizgabe b'bnei Yaakov v'nilvin aleim v'na says ba'olam uma shehi yodas as Hashem." The goal was that it would go generation after generation, that the Jewish people would be a nation of Yodei Hashem, a nation of people that are going to know God. Meaning, it's going to be like Avram did for Yitzchak, and Yitzchak does for Yaakov, and Yaakov does for his children. There's going to be a nation of people that are all Yodei Hashem. Says Ad she'archu hayomim leYisrael b'Mitzrayim, until there were many long days in Mitzrayim, v'chazru lilmod ma'aseim, and they started once again to learn from the ways of their Egyptian neighbors. V'laved avodah zarah k'mosam, and they worshipped idols just like them. Meaning they went to the Egyptian schools and they were part of the Egyptian economy, and you had, Uncle Beryl has his makolet, and one guy comes up to him and says, we're having a festival for Anubis next week. Could you make sure that you have stocked this special food that we have? And he goes, what are you going to do with it? He says, no, this is going to be a big party. He says, I don't know if I can come to the party. He says, no, come to the party. Come to the party. You should come to the party. Okay. Little by little, we became absorbed into Egyptian society, at least on a religious level. And then, as like we discussed last week, as the Jewish people are battling between Jewish identity and Egyptian identity, and are part of the Egyptian economy and wanting to be friends with the Egyptians, and the Egyptians not accepting them, so they adopt the Egyptian practices, because that way we can have a shared culture. Chutz mishevet Levi, except for Levi. Sha'alma b'mitzvahs obviously that kept up with what Yaakov Avinu had promised. Don't stray, keep up with learning. Says ma'olam lo ya'aved shevet Levi avodah zarah, and shevet Levi never was oved avodah zarah. Never were they oved avodah zarah. This is the lashon of the Rambam, and this is devastating. It says v'kimat kat haya, it was almost the end. Va'ika sheshatal Avram nekar, and the sapling that Avram Avinu had planted was uprooted, meaning monotheism was dead. The Jewish people were not there anymore. That dream of Yodei Hashem, of knowers of God, people that would have a relationship and an understanding of divinity and morality and monotheism, was gone. V'chazru b'nei Yaakov litais ha'amim v'ti'asam, and the Jewish people returned to the foolishness of the nations of the world and to all of their abominations, to all of their disgustings. And this is what the Navi described to us. From the great love that Hashem has for us. And in keeping with the oath that he made to Avram, Moshe Rabbeinu, we made this point on Shabbos, says the Rambam, Moshe Rabbeinu, he made Moshe. Moshe was a Bria Bifnei Atzmai. Hashem created this thing called Moshe, like a back door into the matrix. Mamish. Moshe Rabbeinu. He made Moshe Rabbeinu. That's why the beginning of Parashat Shmos details all of the Hashgacha Pratis in the existence of Moshe. Kadosh Baruch Hu wove Moshe Rabbeinu into the fabric of reality in a way that would not have happened without tremendous Hashgacha Pratis. Asa Moshe Rabbeinu, he made him. V'Rabban shel kol hanavim, and he became the rabbi of all the Navim v'Shalchai. And he sent him. Keivan shenisnave Moshe Rabbeinu v'bachar Hashem b'Yisrael l'nachla, and since Moshe Rabbeinu prophesied, and Hashem chose the Jewish people as his inheritance, Hichtiram b'mitzvahs, He crowned us with the mitzvahs, v'hoidi'im derech avodah, and taught us the ways of his avodah. Umaya mishpat avodah zara v'chol hatayim achara, and what is the rule of all of avodah zara and those that are foolish afterwards? That is how the Ram introduces hilchos avodah zara. Now you need to know the halachas of avodah zara. Meaning, you're the people that can recognize that there's avodah zara because you're the chosen people to teach the world that this is foolish. But the language of the Rambam here is everything that we've said here. The foolishness of the Jewish people on an economic and on a religious and on a moral and an ethical and a national level is like going to disappear. Like all of that. And so the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh points out, he asks a tremendous kasha. He says, Chazal tell us that every promise that the Jewish people is given by Hashem, if it's l'tova, if it's for good, so that promise has to come true. And nevuah l'ra does not have to come true. We made this point last week, right? Nevuah l'ra doesn't have to happen, but nevuah l'tova has to happen. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised the Jewish people, "Ve'evesi eschem al haaretz," I will bring you to the land of Israel. And he never brought that group of people to the land of Israel. Why not?
They didn't survive.
They died in the desert, right? They sinned. They messed up. But if HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises that he's going to bring you to the land of Israel, he has to bring you to the land of Israel. How come he didn't bring them to the land of Israel? Meaning, notwithstanding their sins, how could HaKadosh Baruch Hu renege on that promise?
It's the same way he promised Abraham, and then he realized it was a multi-generational thing. So.
No, but
He told Abraham it was not his
Right.
generation.
told Abraham that Geria Zarcha be'eretz, your children will be strangers in strange land. I'll give this to your children. But the pasuk said, Hatzesi happened. Hatzesi v'yitzalti, those happened. Galti happened. Lakachti happened. Why not Ve'evesi? Why didn't Evesi happen? Says the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh, because Ve'evesi was al Tanai. What was the Tanai? What was the condition? It was conditional. Pasuk says, V'lakachti eschem li la'am, I will take you to me as my people. V'hayisi lachem le'elokim, and I will be your God. Vidatem ki ani Hashem, and you will know that I am God. Meaning, in order to re-enter the land of Israel, you need to be a nation of knowers of God. Yoidei Hashem, meaning the goal of the nation of Israel is to be Yoidei Shemech. I mean, we dive into this every day. Yoidei Shemecha v'lo imdei sarasach lishma. We should know you. And that generation never knew God. They didn't. They didn't get to that point of being called Yoidei Hashem. And since they didn't become Yoidei Hashem, it didn't happen for them. It happened for their children. The next generation were Yoidei Hashem. This prerequisite exists ad hayom hazeh, meaning, in order for the Jewish people to fully inhabit the land of Israel, we have to be Yoidei Hashem. That's the thing that makes it work. We need to be Yoidei Hashem. And at the point in time the Jewish people stop being Yoidei Hashem, we stop having rights to Eretz Yisrael. Meaning, we have latent rights to Eretz Yisrael, forever and always. But being brought back to Eretz Yisrael depends on us being Yoidei Hashem. And so what happens here is you have these two sides to the story. You have the story of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, me'avas Hashem, Hashem's great love for us. But you also have begal nafshech, the revulsion that the Jewish people are wallowing in. And the desperate desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to meld these two things, to bring these two things together, to raise up the Jewish people, HaKadosh Baruch Hu to reside amongst us. Like the Ramban spoke about at the beginning of Parashat Shmos, like Dama, to return back to the level of our ancestors, to be the Merkava, which the Jewish people does reach, at least temporarily, at the point in time that there's Hashas HaShechina in the Midbar. Even for that generation, there was some Merkava l'Shechina, not fully, because we went back in Eretz Yisrael, because that still requires Yoidei Shemech, Yoidei Hashem. And they weren't yet at that point. And it would take another generation to fully absorb that. And the next time we have to figure out, well, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu told them, and that is bounded conditionally on this idea of being Yodei Hashem, so then there must have been a possibility at this point of being Yodei Hashem. And how come they didn't become Yodei Hashem? Meaning that generation could have. So then the question that we have to figure out is what went wrong, or arguably what continued to go wrong. Why is it that it never worked out for that generation? Because that is a significant piece of the tikkun that the Jewish people still have to work on. Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach. To be continued, please God, in 2 weeks' time. Next week, we will not be here.
Shkar.